Well, it's a huge welcome for you to join us on the Sales Transformation podcast. You've been quite a difficult person to track down. I think we've been trying to organize this podcast for a few months. But for the listeners, I'd just like to say we discovered Arup because he was cited as being one of the top 50 most influential people in sales enablement to watch out for in 2023. So we thought it would be important for us to at least see if we can get him on our podcast. So we're very grateful, Arup, for you to join us. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. And apologies, it's been a little bit of time. I appreciate you being flexible around some of my personal circumstances. So thank you for that.
Oh, no, we always appreciate the fact people do give us time for these. Before we get going, Arup, would you mind just sharing, for the benefit of our listeners, a little bit about your sort of personal journey? And do you mind if we start, some time back? I mean, how did you get into sales enablement in the first place? What's been your sort of career pathway to the role that you have now?
Yeah, I'd say principally accidental, as I think is the case for most people in either a sales operations or a sales enablement function. When I started my career, which by the way has always been in a B2B capacity, so the kind of natural trajectory for me when I joined and started in corporate life around about 20 odd years ago, the natural trajectory for me is I was trying to find my place in a kind of a corporate environment, the role that was right to me. It ended up being a role that kind of covered analytics, kind of sales performance analytics, a lot of the sales tooling, which naturally just started to lead from being able to undertake some of those disciplines, rolling into what has now become kind of some of the core component parts of both sales operations and then more recently sales enablement as well. So I think I've found my pathway to sales ops and enablement really initially through just luck, as it were, right? And when I talk to a lot of my peers, it's the same for them as well. It's not really a domain that was labeled so clearly as either sales operations or sales enablement 20 years ago. That kind of label didn't exist. You were sort of in a business performance or business strategy function. And I'd say over the last 20 years as well, with the advent of more and more technology that's made these processes fall into place in a kind of much more concrete way, the labeling behind the function as sales operations and sales enablement has really kind of solidified. So as that's been happening, and as I've been able to participate in it, enjoy it, and maybe even to a certain extent shape it as well, it's kind of become the place that I've landed.
So you've come into sort of sales enablement through a sort of, I guess, more the data analytics side. Is that right?
That's true.
So was that where you got your initial degree, for example? Was it in a data science sort of area, and you've sort of transitioned into sales ops from that, or
No, I mean, actually, ironically, my undergraduate is in literature and philosophy.
Oh, is it?
So
Okay.
yeah, absolutely.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay.
So but everybody's comfortable with spreadsheets, right? So
well, some are more than others, I would say.
So yeah, and the maths isn't particularly complex. So yeah, I mean, I think I after university. There isn't, to be fair, a lot that you can do with literature and philosophy. I think it still is a good grounding. I think on reflection, when I look back on it, it's a great grounding in terms of having helped my corporate communication, my ability to analyze, my ability to see lots of different things connected.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the process behind doing literature is you look at multiple pieces of work and the common themes that run across them. So actually, it's really helped me in terms of analyzing business challenges and commonalities, etc. It's helped me a lot, but perhaps I didn't appreciate that when I left university. And I was looking for a role, as it were, and actually doing what ended up being data entry. What I started off doing as a kind of a data entry analyst, then kind of transitioned into actually I'm quite comfortable with spreadsheets and databases, and then that transitioned into actually I can produce analytics and reports and insights. Now that transitioned into sales performance analytics. So it was kind of almost a sort of organic process of, I need a job. I'm actually quite good at this and comfortable with the technology that you need to use. And it sort of kind of.
I quite agree with the link to English literature. I mean, we, as you may know, we're a sales business school, and we run our undergraduate and postgraduate degrees in partnership with Middlesex University, and we have this.
Yep.
This would be unfair, but it's said in the nicest way. But there's a particular lecturer at Middlesex University who is passionate about literature, and she introduces literature into the final year of our master's program. So we have these salespeople who typically hate reading and studying things, picking up a book, all of a sudden being transformed into reading extracts from these amazing books that I don't know where she plucks them from. And not only that, she actually encourages them to write. And we have now about 20 of our students, having finished the masters, going on to write for academic publications or indeed a book. And we've got 2 books coming out this year from our students, all because of this one mad, fun, brilliant lecturer at Middlesex University who's passionate about literature. So
Right.
I think the ability to be able to synthesize information, make sense, critically reflect, all of those things you need for looking at data has a real strong connection with literature. So, yeah. So I had to share that story because just seeing how people respond, to literature.
And of course, you told me previously that you work with Middlesex University, and actually that's kind of my alma mater. That's where I did my
that's
my
right.
undergraduate.
You did your undergraduate there,
exactly.
Yeah.
So I was obviously very, very, very very keen to support.
Yes.
And actually, I'm also a kind of fellow at the ISP, so I've joined up at the Institute of Sales Professionals as well. And again, I absolutely love the ethos of yourselves and the ISP in terms of wanting to build kind of more of a kind of a recognized career pathway with the academic, with the academic grounding and the background to be able to help elevate that role of sales. So I completely love that. And I think for me, from a sales enablement perspective, that feels like that's the next chapter for me, right? Because a lot of sales enablement is, by its very nature today, because it's a discipline, it's a growing discipline, there's so much technology in it. A lot of it is about, what are the kind of the sort of almost modular components of what you need to do to be able to drive a productive sales organization. Absolutely. I think, which and by the way, I'm not suggesting that I have that knuckled down or that I do that at all. And I've still got a lot to learn and a lot to do and a lot to develop and a lot to continue to deliver. But I love the ethos of stretching my thinking now to being like, how do I help elevate that role of sales, and how do I help more broadly, people participate in that education process? But then equally, how can I bring some of that closer to home within my organization?
Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah, thank you for your comments. Yes, we're on a journey, but if we focus on the sales enablement world, I mean, I think it's something that's really grown, hasn't it, in terms of its stature, recognition as a function, and perhaps as a philosophy as well inside organizations as well. And I think the idea, I was talking to someone else who had a sales enablement role, and I asked the question, do you ever think it will become a board? Will it become will we have the chief enablement officers now? And perhaps those positions actually exist, because in a way you're straddling both, the data side of things and the sort of analytics of what needs to drive sales performance, but also with the enablement side, which is sort of developing the future skill sets. It's a hugely important function, I think, in any business.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, I've certainly seen that. It's rare, but I've seen it, and I've seen it more perhaps in the revenue operations space. So I've kind of seen, the sort of the chief revenue operations.
Officer.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you've got the chief, the CRO, which is the chief revenue officer, and then there's kind of chief revenue operations, so sort of almost CROO. And it's sort of interesting because you're right, because it is a bit challenging, because does that role straddle a bit of strategy? Does it straddle a little bit of sales? Does it straddle? It straddles so many different parts. It also straddles a little bit of kind of marketing, but then you have each of those individual areas also adequately represented by those senior leaders. So, I can sort of see there is value in having enablement and kind of revenue operations and revenue enablement. It's valuable to have those roles have a seat at the table, without doubt, particularly in environments where there may be misalignment across some of those other stakeholders at the high table, for want of a better expression. But then equally at the same time, I kind of also think, well, is that adding too many voices into the mix?
Right.
When actually sometimes it's better to have a slightly simpler model.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, it is interesting, right? For a period of time earlier this year, we've had some leadership change, and I report up into the chief commercial officer. So again,
Yes.
sort of the senior vice president of sales, if you like. So for a period of time, we had that role as a gap, and so I had, for a 4-month period of time, an interim reporting up into our regional president. So arguably, I kind of had, did I have a seat at the table? Not exactly. I wasn't invited into the monthly meetings, but I certainly had the regional president's ear, and we were able to talk about a lot of things. And actually, again, we reflected a lot on the culture of the sales organization and how could I help maybe move the dial in terms of trying to influence some of that culture. So does this role have a place, at C-suite? Maybe, but I think it would need to be able to showcase differentiated value in that respect, as opposed to just the nuts and bolts of, we need to do ABC or XYZ initiative to drive, an increase in productivity. I think it has to go beyond that.
Well, I think it might be helpful for the listeners also to understand a bit more of your sort of current context as well,
Sure.
because I know you've had some sort of great roles with Amex. Is that right? And,
that's right.
Yeah. Absolutely. And now, but Elavon, is it Elavon? I can't remember exactly.
Yeah. Yes.
And then I think you've had sort of supporting roles with various startups, and now I think Equifax.
Yeah.
So maybe just honing in on your current role, Arup. What could you just describe what it is? What is your role? What's the scope of your role? Maybe the type of sales organization that you're kind of sort of supporting in your current role.
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined Equifax in June 2022. So I've been here now literally a little over a year.
Yeah.
About 14, 15 odd months. And very much new to the credit reference agency world.
Yeah.
So still kind of in financial services and the financial services vertical, as I'm sure, as you've alluded to, and I'm sure you've seen. I spent 13 years at American Express in 2 B2B lines of business, and then previously about 7 years at Elavon, again in a payments industry and a payments company. Having moved into Equifax, it's really interesting because I suppose from a kind of a vertical perspective, Equifax is upstream from the companies like American Express, Visa, Elavon, because they're essentially supplying those companies with information about businesses and individuals that help those companies make decisions about lines of credit and loan products, etc.
Yeah.
So that's where kind of Equifax sits in terms of its, its offering. Again, I think from a marketplace perspective, it is really interesting because if you look at credit reference agencies on a global basis, and even locally within mature markets, generally sort of Western developed mature markets, you really only have 3 global players: Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, right? And somewhere along the line, someone you will have interacted with either one of these brands, right? Again, if I think about TransUnion, are great at being able to offer your credit report to a consumer. They're able to offer their credit report, and they have a lot of their strategy is embedded around having their capability enabled through retail banking applications. So if I go to my phone and I go to my retail banking application and it says, would you like to see your credit score? And I go, yes, I'd love to see my credit score. And it takes me in, and generally that data and that capability is powered oftentimes by TransUnion, sometimes by Experian, but TransUnion have a good handle on that marketplace. And it's interesting because, again, if you look at us globally, it's really three providers.
Yeah.
So you could, of course, argue that it's very oligopolistic, that it's,
Yeah.
it's really only three providers that have the marketplace cut up.
Yeah.
And so actually, as a result, we should, in the kind of the classic economist view, we should actually be able to control price and be able to control the profit margins that we experience within the industry. Right. It's not that simple. Unfortunately, fortunately, but probably fortunately, otherwise we'd all be regulated to heck, right? But fortunately, it isn't quite so simple. But it is an interesting marketplace dynamic. You've got three big providers that have a huge amount of competitiveness in an environment where information is becoming much more readily available. Decisioning around information doesn't have to come from a credit reference agency like an Equifax or an Experian. Right. Increasingly big financial services companies have got data scientists and data engineers and these types of capabilities, and they can run their own decisioning capabilities. Right. So it's becoming what feels like an increasingly commoditized marketplace.
Okay.
So it is a very interesting kind of competitive dynamic.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So you sell to who are your customer groups then? I imagine you've got a B2B customer group and maybe B2C. I don't know.
We do. So we have a kind of a B2B2C. We've got a direct to consumer. So yes, absolutely. Again, that's like exposing your credit report and your credit report app out to consumers. So you can come to the Equifax website and kind of sign up for your credit report, and you pay a subscription fee for a period of time to be able to access that data. As with all providers like us, we also provide insights in terms of why your credit report is is the way it is, and what actions you can take to improve it. Sort of building on that is our B2B2C model. So we could then provide that almost as a white label capability to other, to other providers in the marketplace, like ClearScore, and they would take that and then push that out.
Yes.
And then our B2B offering is about the information and the insights provided to other typically financial service institutions, so that they can take that data, they can take those insights, and then make instantaneous decisions as to whether they're going to offer a credit or a loan product to a customer, or they're going to continue to offer a credit or a loan capability to a particular customer. Yeah. So in that space, of course, we work with, very large scale retail banks, all the way from NatWest to Barclays to Santander. Of course, with all of the auto financiers, so Toyota, VW, etc. Auto financing is huge. Mobile telecoms. So, again, if I'm going to give you an expensive handset to walk out of a store, I need to be able to run a credit report, credit reference check, just to make sure that you can pay that back, and that I'm not kind of giving you, an expensive asset that I'm never going to see again. So those are the sorts of, anywhere where there's kind of, absolutely, even with the likes of Very. So we work with Very because Very, of course, extends a line of credit out to their customers. Yes. Anywhere where that facility is required, we're able to support.
Okay. That's great. And your role is in providing, data support to the selling organization that's selling to these kind of organizations.
Completely. So I'd say I have 5 major streams that sit underneath me. And they cover both the sales operations and the sales enablement space. So number one is absolutely all about education and kind of coaching. So I have a sales enablement director that sits in my team, and he looks after all of the sales training programs that we have. We want to roll out. We've been developing some of that. Actually, a lot of what we're doing is kind of greenfield. So we're plugging in processes and capabilities and activities that haven't existed before. So there's a whole chunk of work around sales education and sales training.
Right.
Secondly, same individual looks after all of our sales news and best practice. So again, as we sort of think about, parts of the organization where we want to be able to understand what's worked well there and kind of build out a nice little story, and kind of from really simple things to driving, from really simple things like driving, kind of motivational good news stories on a Friday, all the way through to being able to provide some of this content in kind of a more up the line update to leadership. We've kind of got a whole sort of section on sales news and sales best practice.
Okay.
Third is all on, and it's a huge piece, is all on bid proposal. So being able to support RFPs, RFIs, tender documentation, all of that. So again, that's a whole section that my team look after. The fourth is on sales performance analytics. So yes, what data do we have in the system? What data can we extract from, of course, more often than not from our CRM system, and how can we utilize that information to understand what good looks like in terms of sales process and sales execution, who's doing really well at that, who could do better. And again, a lot of that is real close collaboration with finance, because they will have, of course, all the revenue data, the ledger data. And again, finance look after all of our sales bonus incentive plan execution and sales bonus payments. So again, looking at who's performing well, why they're performing well, etc. And then the fifth is all of the sales tools. So again, I look after, from a business perspective, all of our CRM tools, all of our sales enablement tools, etc. So all of that kind of the tech piece.
All of that. There's quite a number of spinning plates. I would
imagine there's a lot of spinning plates. Yeah, completely. So and I think 3 individuals in my team. So we are doing, I think, a grand job. A total number of sellers that we that we support is across the UK business. So UK focus across the UK business, something like 70 to 75. Total sellers. So it's a large-ish enough number. Yeah, and there's plenty to do. And so yes, I think a good chunk of what I do is just help my team prioritize and kind of help them, have that constructive conversation back into our stakeholders.
Yeah, fantastic. So during an earlier conversation, I'd love to. There are many topics that I'd love to explore with you, and one of the topics would be around, the explosion of sort of technology related tools that can enable salespeople to become more productive. But you also talked about culture, which actually is a subject so close to my heart as well. And one of the sort of quotes that you often hear about is sort of culture eats strategy for breakfast. Quite often, you can have a great strategy, but the culture's not right. But on the other hand, if you have the right culture, but without any strategy in place, you're going to be sort of slightly directionless. So it kind of, you need both. But I'm really interested to, when you start to look at some of the sort of nutty problems you have to deal with, and with your sort of commercial director has to deal with, what role do you think culture has to play, and how do you think about culture? Because it's quite a nebulous kind of topic in a way. It's something that's unique to your business, and so tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think so. From a cultural perspective, there's sort of 3 strands that I've been trying to engage around and sort of build some, I guess, a little bit of collective energy behind. Number one, so when I joined the organization, that was June last year, and I just joined, and we just released our annual employee survey. So I partook of the annual employee survey, right? I'm brand new into the company, so everything was super, super, super positive. Then when the results came out in July, August, I was obviously kind of super surprised to hear that our line of business, we were tracking from an employee engagement perspective round about a score of 55%, right? Okay. So which is challenging, right? Because on a typical benchmark, I think within the organization, the typical benchmark was round about 70%. And if you look at that kind of the high performing companies, they generally track at the sort of the 80% plus benchmark in terms of employee engagement. So to be tracking at 55 is definitely a warning sign. Now, again, I think some of that is improved. We haven't retaken a survey just yet. I do think some of that is improved, because again, I think some of that was very sort of influenced very directly by a lot of flux in terms of the sales leadership. So I think that's settled really well. So when we do take the next survey, I wouldn't be surprised if that improves a decent degree, at least 60%. But I think it's still a little bit of a watch out, even if we're tracking in at about 60%, even 65%. That's essentially saying that 6 out of 10 people are happy here. and the rest are either ambivalent or they've got their eye on the door, right?
Yeah.
So, and obviously, I would prefer for us to be tracking the 70 to 80% plus. So that's kind of my first sort of area, which is like, how do we improve the culture? How do we start to bring a little bit of a
Mm.
sense of a high performance culture? So actually, instead of it just being, how do we tinker with this? I think my recommendation has been, actually, let's stretch it. Let's talk about a high performance culture. Let's start to talk about that. Let's talk about what
Yeah.
that means, what that means to individuals, right? And how we start to get that sense of a growth mindset in place, literally for everybody, right? And that doesn't mean that you have to aspire to be two levels up in the organization, but it
Mm.
means that you feel engaged in, yesterday was yesterday, and actually today I'm already better than I was yesterday, right? How do we
Yeah.
help generate a degree of sort of energy in that respect? So that was number one. Number two, because I look after all of these strands, no surprise, I look after the forecasting process, right? So we
Yeah.
get into our forecasting call every 2 weeks, and salespeople love to be super, super positive, like way too positive, right? And I suppose that's maybe the other challenge is finding the right way of being not too positive and not wanting to bite off more than we can chew, and perhaps even not being too
Mm.
opportunistic and not kind of going, oh, yes, we'll get that deal, or yes, we'll get that deal, or yes, we'll get that deal, but just being like super focused on what is it that we can chase, what is it that we can go after, and actually, if it also means that perhaps we haven't got the revenue trajectory that we want or that we're aspiring to, that
Yeah.
we are able to message that appropriately in the fullness of time, whenever that
Yes.
message needs to land, and we can help our regional president also convey that message again up the line as needed. So that was number three in terms of the kind of the sort of the propensity to be a little bit over enthusiastic. And then I think number three is connected to that, is very much around prioritization. We're absolutely an organization that across the board, we just don't like to say no, right? Absolutely, we don't like to say no.
Right.
And that's true for almost every organization I've been in. It's very difficult to say no. But I do find that in Equifax, we're so engaged in what's the next opportunity, what do we need to move on to, that actually we're doing ourselves a disservice when we're not focusing in on the select few that will drive the most impact. And then
Okay.
number one and number two, we're trying to move on so quickly. I think sometimes we're at risk of not completing an activity completely. We're at risk of certainly not celebrating when that activity is
Mm.
completed. And I think so. Those are the three sorts of cultural areas that I'm trying to sort of chip away at, if you like. I'm trying to
Yeah.
build that stakeholder set with HR and kind of getting some voices in HR with a few of the other senior
Yeah.
leaders in the organization, just to kind of go, well, how do we improve this? How do we improve our prioritization? How do we take a more balanced approach towards the way that we forecast, so that we're
Yeah.
not being too enthusiastic? And actually, how do we convey an authentic voice into the sales teams that talks
Okay.
about high performance and how we want to help everybody reach that threshold. So
Right.
there's a balance of
Yeah. Yeah.
activities there.
Yeah. No, it's quite interesting. Reminds me of a number of quotes that I've heard about, and on the topic of probability, which is quite interesting. And I love that sort of Daniel Kahneman book as well. He writes about he talks about probability, thinking fast and slow, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is just a fantastic book. But we had someone stand up and talk at one of our stock exchange events, and Paul Devlin, and he said, and he was working for a data company, so he was very much a data guy, and he said, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it's a duck. And I keep on coming back to this, because I think that salespeople, perhaps like you said, are generally more optimistic, and they perhaps, actually, this is going to be quite controversial, but they like to take the least amount of effort, to get to a sort of given result, and so they're assuming that they've got enough pipeline to hit their targets, but actually they need to have maybe double or triple the pipeline to get their targets. But
exactly.
they want to take the path of least resistance from an effort point of view to get.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting, and I just know myself from the sales, that when you close a deal, you think that every deal in your pipeline is going to close. You get wildly optimistic. But if you lose a deal, the converse sometimes happens. You think every single deal in the pipeline is not going to close. So you tend to be rather emotional about it, not sort of data driven, not calm, and not looking at. I don't know if you think generally that's an issue that sales people have. Is they're sort of more, emotionally driven individuals. They're very much, that's why they're in sales. They like building relationships, rather than kind of data driven. So
completely, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
I think that's absolutely the case, and and so it was interesting. When we had our sales kickoff at the start of this year. It was end of February, and I presented on kind of high performance behaviors and what I was seeing in our CRM system. And I very, very started off by caveating that what I was looking at was average stats across the population of all the salespeople, and recognizing that some of our salespeople were in key account management roles that were very, very, very specialized in terms of the almost the one-to-one relationship of a salesperson with that account, with that existing account. And so the dynamic there, when you're looking at such a strong, close, almost one-to-one relationship with an account, you're going to have a different dynamic as opposed to if you're a salesperson with even with a ring-fenced portfolio of 20 accounts, but you have more of a wider pool, and you have perhaps an open marketplace, and you can add into that ring-fence list and take out of that ring-fence list. So when you're looking at things like, do you have an adequate pipeline? Do you have enough leads/opportunities in your pipeline? And are you creating enough? The stats were stacked considerably in favor of a much higher percentage and much higher value for the top performers versus the standard performers. And I came off that presentation, and I sat down at my table, and then one of my colleagues at the same table as me, that individual said to me, well, obviously that doesn't apply to me. That doesn't apply to me. I look after XYZ retailer bank, so we only have a very, very limited pool of opportunity. And I said, okay. Then I went back and I looked at that individual's opportunity creation in the sort of the final half of last year. It was stellar. There was loads of opportunities there. So I don't know if it's a case of, I also think there's, I don't think this is too controversial, but sales do like to downplay it too. When they can, they do like to downplay it. When they have the opportunity, absolutely, they'll sing about the upside, and they'll be super glass half full. And equally, when you show them some stats that says, actually, we expect this performance, wow, that doesn't happen in my patch, Gov. It would never happen. It's far too small a marketplace, not enough opportunity. How am I going to hit that number? Who knows? Well, okay. The data states otherwise, actually.
There's also a great story on the same topic, which just share with you, which is someone who I think is one of the most brilliant sort of analytical sales ops people that I've ever met. And he was, he studied all this data, and he was looking at predictive analytics in a lot of detail. And he recalled a conversation with his boss, and it was his boss's birthday. And his boss was saying to his group of regional direct reports, he said, if you really want me to have the happiest birthday, is that all you guys will hit this, I think it was a 55 million sort of target by the end of this next quarter. And Offer Zilberman, he's been on this podcast before. He said to his boss afterwards, he said, do you know that if they hit 55 million, this will be the worst quarter that you'll ever have, because the data says we're going to hit 72, not 55. And the sales director said, nah, I don't think we're going to hit 72. And they hit something like 71.7. Right. Okay. And he said this has massive implications for things like compensation. Because if you set a target of 55, but you're paying people accelerators once you hit the target. So I mean, I found that quite interesting as well. This whole aspect of how people kind of look at data as a way of better predicting, I think, sales performance. And it's interesting how you've connected it back to culture, because the strands that you've described earlier, I don't know, I would have not necessarily linked that to culture, but I think you're talking about creating a more authentic culture around high performance. I think that's where you want to go.
Yeah.
And you're saying in order to be authentic, we need to be perhaps better equipped at looking at data and probability as one of the strands.
Yeah, I think so. So I think there's a lot of prevalent research at the moment. I'm sure you're totally dialed into, Philip, that looks at marginal gains and marginal improvements, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think, again, if I think about high performance, one of the areas that, and I don't see it as a silver bullet, but I sort of definitely see it as a key contributor towards building high performance in individuals, and then a kind of a more collective high performance culture, is notions such as, marginal gains. Like how do you continue to focus on the small improvements that you can make in your daily processes that build up over time. And interestingly, there's so much of the technology today that offers that direct support for you to be able to do that.
Right.
So, for example, things like conversation intelligence. So again, I'll name all the names so that there's no sort of, there's no preference here. I think you obviously got some very large household names in that space, such as Gong and Jiminy, even the likes of Big Tin Can, Brainshark. They're kind of developing capabilities in that space. I think Allego is. So like a lot of the sales enablement platforms have conversation intelligence capabilities in there. And when you talk to these companies and you talk to clients of these companies, the ones that use the capability of the technology really effectively, they're taking everything that they can from it. Because a conversation intelligence platform will, of course, it records the conversation that you have with your client. And then it gives you a whole range of statistics in terms of, did you ask enough questions? Were they open-ended, kind of probing questions, or actually were you locking down into kind of, were they more closed questions? So actually, is there a learning opportunity there? What was your mix of talking to listening, and is there a learning opportunity there? So all of these kind of stats, and what was your sentiment and your client sentiment as you were going through that conversation? So a huge amount of insight that you can get from tools like conversation intelligence, which then drive through to that notion of marginal gains. Because if you're undertaking, a range of conversations in the week as a salesperson with your client or clients, and then you have an opportunity, you are disciplined about taking that insight from a conversation intelligence platform, and you listen back to it. Not only does it help remind you of all of the key points and kind of the key anchor points from a commercial negotiation perspective, but you also start to self-analyze, and you start to self-coach in terms of, well, how did that conversation go? Could I have done better? What should I have done better? Did I ask enough probing questions? And actually, when we got to a certain point in the conversation where perhaps I could have closed down the conversation a little bit more, sort of locked in some agreement on next steps, did I do that, or did I still leave it a little bit open, etc.? I think those sorts of capabilities allow you to experience that notion of marginal gain. And where at the moment marginal gains is kind of talked about, you don't need, an Olympiad on stage to talk to you about how they've incorporated marginal gains into their. I mean, it's always thrilling and it's always inspiring to see someone from the British cycling team on stage talking to you about how they've incorporated marginal gains into their daily processes, and how sales and commercial environments can learn to do the same. Yes, it's thrilling to hear that, but the reality is we can do all of that, and ultimately part of my objective and my goal set is to look at, okay, we talk about marginal gains, what does that actually mean from a practical perspective, and what do we need in terms of the capabilities and the organization to start to get those building blocks in place. Once we've got those building blocks in place, that doesn't drive the culture, because the cultural change happens over time, it ultimately becomes, if I give you these tools, will you be able to take advantage of them and then start to improve your performance? And as with any audience, any population, there will be some of our salespeople that immediately gel with that and take to it straight away, and then there will be the remainder will have to go through some level of change management, adoption, etc.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's part and parcel.
Yeah. That's really interesting. If you were looking kind of more to the future and you're looking at, capabilities of sales teams, whether from a systems or an enablement skills point of view, what do you think organizations need to be cognizant of in order to build a future ready, high performing sales team? And it may be that you've alluded to some of these kind of factors already, but what would you say would be some of the key things?
I mean, I think, embracing technology is without doubt, a kind of a fundamental factor.
Yeah.
And all of the outstanding salespeople that I've seen, that I've talked to recently, they don't have a fear of that technology. They're quite comfortable engaging with the CRM solution. They recognize that there is a degree of admin associated with it naturally, but actually they can use that technology to help drive their productivity, and that scales across everything, right? So whether it's, have I updated my opportunity or my lead record or my activities in the CRM, all the way through to, can I now start to use, things like ChatGPT in my favor?
Yeah.
The ability to engage with technology and to sort of understand the promise that it provides. And of course, to do that within the kind of the compliant mechanisms of the constraints of your company. Obviously, doing that with the rule set of your company. I think that's where an improvement in productivity is just sort of naturally there if you're able to sort of harness that and move forward with it.
And so you've talked about technology, but from a sort of soft skills basis, perhaps, are there any do you see any emergent themes also sort of developing in time in terms of what are the key sort of competencies that you would expect the sales team of the future to have, or sales leaders of the future to have as well?
Well, I mean, so certainly what I see today, I don't think there's anything revolutionary here in terms of soft skills. Nothing at all. I think the basics are the basics. And I, certainly what I would say that is, again, as I described it as greenfield, what we don't have here is a sales competency framework. So, we don't have a sort of a skill set matrix that very clearly call out the skills that you will need or you should exhibit or want to grow as a salesperson, very specifically to your role as a salesperson to help you become successful in that role. So we have nothing here. Again, if I reflect back to my previous organization, we didn't have anything there. I mean, I left American Express, nigh on 7-8 years ago, and we certainly didn't have anything there.
Okay.
So again, I do think it's kind of the back to the basics of, actually, we need to have a sales competency framework, number one. Number two, does it call out those skill sets that are buckets of skills that are very, very specific to the sales role? And then how do we have the right training and coaching programs to be able to help develop that skill set? So again, from an enablement perspective, we could roll out all of the training, but if it doesn't come with some form of coaching, you're not going to reinforce and embed that skill set. You're not going to get the individual contributor to continue to focus on that, reflect on it, learn from it, learn from the positives and the constructives and the opportunities, and then start to instill that behavior into their day-to-day practice. And then that comes back to, actually, do we have even a sales leadership coaching program within Equifax? We don't. In Equifax UK, we certainly don't have a sales leadership coaching program. So again, that's a kind of a massive gap. As I've talked to a number of the sales leaders over the last year or so, without a doubt, every single person has oftentimes the same story, which is, I was great as an individual contributor. I got promoted into a leadership role, I didn't necessarily initially want to be in a leadership role. Now I really love it. I learned my leadership journey through a process of trial and
Trial
error.
and
So
error.
and it's exactly why actually, if I'd had a coaching program and a development program when I was moved into that sales leadership role, it would have been so different. And yes, we have leadership growth programs here at Equifax on a global basis. So I'm certainly not taking away from that. And I
Yeah.
think, and I've encouraged all of our sales leadership to look at that. But as with any kind of function, in the first instance, if you're promoted from an individual contributor to a leadership role, in the first instance, in a lot of cases, you're so proud of that fact. You just, and you at the same time oftentimes don't have enough bandwidth and capacity to start to engage in a whole bunch of other
Yeah.
organizational formal learning, if it exists. So actually what we need is something a little bit more local, a little bit more customized, a little bit more focused on the sales leadership, certainly the first line sales leadership population, and
Yes.
giving them all of the coaching, the development, and the tools that they need to help ultimately coach
Yeah.
the individuals rolling up into them. And as I said, I think that there's again no silver bullet. I think it's kind of the basics. It's 101. But
Yeah.
if you can do that, and you can do that well, and you have the time afforded to you by your organization to put those practices and those frameworks and those disciplines in place,
Mm.
I think you start to see material gains come from that.
Yeah. So I'm recognizing where we are time-wise, and I just wonder whether we could finish off sort of talking about your roles beyond Equifax, because you have an interest in the ISP and also I think the Sales Enablement Society as well, if I'm not
Absolutely.
mistaken. So
Yes.
could you just tell me a little bit about those two roles and why are you investing time, in those two organizations?
Yeah, I mean, Philip, I love it, and
Yeah.
maybe that sounds, I don't know. I mean, is it do we ever do anything that's 100% altruistic? I don't know.
Yeah.
Obviously, I get some value in return in terms of
Yes.
being able to showcase my thought leadership, showcase my engagement, showcase
Yeah.
my desire to help the community, and that reflects positively on me.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think um, what I really value is the opportunity to be able to make that kind of community based contribution.
Yeah.
And so, I'll kind of let you into to an insight about myself. I've reflected on this a few times, right? A few years ago, almost 10 years ago, one of my best friends passed away. And
Mm.
unfortunately, he took his own life.
Oh
And
God.
and from that point in time, I've always been sort of thinking, and I've never kind of thought, could I have done more? Because I know that as a group of friends, we did everything that we could to support him,
Yeah.
and it was unfortunate. And I think at that time, 10 years ago, in the place that I was in the organization that I was in, I don't think I really kind of understood how that connected to my why and what I wanted to do and how I wanted to
Hmm.
um like notion of living a high performance and fulfilling life. I don't think I connected to it previously. And over the last 2 to 3 years, I've connected much more emphatically towards it. I've connected much more in the context of, this is what I love doing, this is what I like to do, this is what I'd like to be able to bring. I think my
Mm.
connections to the Sales Enablement Society, the Sales Enablement Collective, even supporting through Be the Business uh,
Yeah.
kind of startup businesses and founders, my connection to the ISP, and of course, even here, all of
Yes.
these areas allow me to sort of convey that message of, I want to, in the spaces where I have some opportunity to operate, I want to be able to convey that message
Mm.
of helping people live a high performance life, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's what's connected me, and I still feel slightly cheesy and embarrassed about saying that. But maybe it isn't. But maybe that is what I'm genuinely passionate
No,
about. And
I
actually,
think
when I kind of come back to it and I center on that, I feel complete. And then it's kind of
yeah.
like, okay, that's sort of the driver.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing a very poignant story. And I think these pivotal moments that we have in our lives, and how we reflect back on it. And it was interesting. It's been some time after the event, wasn't it? That you sort of,
Yeah.
sounds like it took you a while to process, but then, a couple of years ago, it sort of helped clarify your own purpose and why you do
It,
what you do.
exactly. And I think to a certain extent, also, age always helps,
Yeah.
right? So, a few more gray hairs and you start to go, actually, what do I enjoy doing? And why is that? And how have maybe more very challenging experiences like that? How have they helped me? And actually, what do I want to do? And,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of what I say has definitely shaped,
Yeah.
kind of my engagement.
Yeah. It's a central module that we have on our sales leadership masters is going down into your own values and belief systems. And there are two ways you can do this. Just very quickly, there's a quick way where you can sort of start to look at a list of values and beliefs that exist from a list and choose those that you think most relate to you. And then the other way, which I think is better, is actually going back into pivotal moments in your life and really reflecting on what you did as a consequence of that, and exploring more deeply your feelings at the time. Enables you to come up with a more authentic, I would say, selection process. And what I found, it is very rare to get salespeople, sales leaders, actually knowing what their core values and belief systems are. And without that knowledge, I think it's very difficult then to create, or less difficult, it's more difficult to then create a sort of an authentic leadership vision of how you want to lead your team, because you haven't quite figured out who you are and what your role is. So it's I think it's hugely important. But like you say, sometimes it comes with experience and age. But it's often one of the most transformative elements of the master's program, is that sort of deep self-reflection that you need to have, which really looks at your own personal operating system. Because once you know that, you can then start to build on it, in different ways. But
Completely agree.
yeah, no, it's been a fascinating conversation. We've gone an hour already, and I honestly, the time is sped so quickly. I'm sorry it's taken us onto the hour, but I just want to thank you hugely for taking part and sharing your thoughts and points of view. I think our listeners are going to find it a really, really interesting podcast. So thank you very much.
No, and equally, thank you so much. And thank you for your patience in terms of getting this scheduled.
No problem.
Appreciate that.